Today we're going to be talking about fate versus free will, which I think is probably one of the most argued and possibly oldest philosophical debates in human history. People are always talking about, are we here based on fate? Are we here? Do we have free will to do what we want? And we're really diving into that today and how that is based in a religious sort of point of view, understanding that and how it influences our worldview, our ethics, our personal decisions, and and how that intersects between the themes of religion, evolution, and creation. So stick around, and we're going to dive in just a bit.
You're listening to Runyons Have Layers, the podcast where two siblings explore the many layers of life and mental wellness, where vulnerability meets strength and where every shared story is a step towards self-discovery. Join us as we peel back the layers. If you would like to be notified of upcoming episodes, sign up for our email list at runyonshavelayers.com. And don't forget to share this episode with a friend and leave us a rating or review. When I was in the church, I had a hard time reconciling the idea of like fate or destiny or things that are supposed to be or God's will versus free will. And what's interesting to me is that even within Christianity, there's arguments about, what is right and what isn't. And, I didn't like the idea of my entire life already being planned out, because then I felt like I didn't have any choices. Yet at the same time, it sort of felt comforting to think of it that way, because then I was like, well, then I don't have to worry about XYZ. But then a bunch of shit kept happening to me. And I'm like, what is this like? This is what's predestined for me,
Yeah.
And whenever that would be talked about, like in church or whatever, there was always some kind of answer like, oh, well, this. And it was like, there was always an excuse or a justification for why it was happening. And I'm like, okay, well, it's either one or the other, right? It's not both at the same time. So I don't believe in that really anymore. I mean, I don't know, destiny. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like things are like, divinely timed and aligned and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if that's, what that really is, but I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I feel like my opinion changes all the time. Not all the time, but frequently. I mean, just in the past couple of years, I feel like I started to believe a little bit more in predetermined things more than I used to. And I think I started not to, like, I think I feel like, no, that, fate, destiny, that's all, bullshit, because I felt like that was so tied to religion, which I feel like it is still, but I think that was why I was so against it, was because of Christianity and all of that. But I feel like the more that I took a look at things that happened in my life, and if you look back and you're like, oh yeah, if that had not happened, then I wouldn't have gone to this job, or I wouldn't have moved, or I wouldn't have found, met this person that would have led here to this, to this, to this. So, but I mean, it's a way to possibly justify, things happening that maybe you didn't like, or, things that were bad, people dying, losing jobs. And so, I don't know. I think it's a really hard question to answer, for sure. But just to kind of lay it out just for the listeners on the difference between fate and free will. I mean, I feel like this is pretty easy, but just so we're all on the same page, that the traditional definition of fate is seen as a predetermined course of events beyond human control, and that's essentially what destiny is. Same sort of interchangeable terms, that no matter what you do, even if you have free will, or you're making your own choices, you're making choices that are essentially leading you on this predetermined course. And then free will is the ability to make choices, and that's not determined by any prior course or divine intervention. And I feel like if there's anything that I feel like right now, what I believe and what I'm sort of understanding as far as the world goes right now is that it's a little bit of both. And I feel like, I mean, I always feel like I have free will unless, there's some sort of rule that's governing what I have to do or can't do.
Right.
But I don't know. It's just, sometimes you make choices and it's like, why didn't I make this other choice? Why did I choose that? And choosing this one path is what took me this way. And you won't know if you're like, well, what if I chose the other way? How would things be? You don't know that, but it just sort of makes you think like, well, like, was that my choice or was that a choice that I made because of all these other factors that were going on?
I was just going to say that I feel similarly, like, in some situations I'm like, oh yeah, that, I would have never met this person, or I never would have had this job, or, because of a horrible situation that happened, and it's like, I don't want to believe that the horrible situations are predestined,
Mm-hmm.
but then I wouldn't have gotten the good if the bad hadn't happened. Um,
Right.
and I don't know. I mean, it's it's hard to reconcile in my mind. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't have to be one or the other. We've talked about that too, like the duality of things, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that. But I feel more
Yeah.
comfort knowing that I have control, or believing that I have control over my decisions and my life, and it's not like somebody else made those decisions for me.
Yeah. I just want to read a quote from the famous Forrest Gump movie, and he talks about destiny, and he says, "I don't know if we each have a destiny or if we're all floating around accidental like on a breeze, but I think maybe it's both. Maybe both is happening at the same time." And I think that's sort of what we're talking about. Is
Mm-hmm.
it's just that and that movie really. I mean, I think a lot of movies go into this theme a lot, but that one in particular really tackles that theme of like, is what's happening fate or free will, and like how are all these pieces coming together, all these historical major events are coming together,
Yeah.
and is that destiny in some way? But I just wanted to talk about just a few small examples of how it shows up in different types of belief systems. And
Mm-hmm.
even as far back as the Greeks and Greek mythology, fate determined their lifespan and destiny of the gods and humans. In Christianity, predestination suggests that God has a plan for every individual. And in Hinduism, karma dictates the person's actions in past lives. The actions in one's past life influences their present and future. So, like that saying, "Oh, that's bad karma,"
Mm-hmm.
that comes from Hinduism, because if you do bad actions, or if you're yeah, that's probably the easy way to say it. If you're giving bad actions to other people, or you're doing bad actions, that lowers you down in the social structure essentially. And so you want to have good karma because that makes you up, and that takes you to enlightenment essentially,
Mm.
which is the highest level of being is enlightenment. And then in free will, there's the concept, comes up a lot in similarly in Greek and Christianity and Hinduism. I feel like, this idea that you have the ability to make free choices, but that there's always this like underlying destiny sort of thing. But it comes up a lot in literature, in particular, talking about free will, and in a book called Crime and Punishment, and it struggles to highlight the conflict between fate and free will, and sort of like, kind of what we're talking about here. And there's also like, our daily life, our everyday decisions, from what career we want to go toward, who we want to fall in love with. I don't know if that's a choice or not, but, just like, what do you want to have for breakfast? Where do you want to
Mm-hmm.
go and what do you want to do today? And yeah, it's just, like I said, it's really hard to say kind of what it is, but, I shifting towards the sort of religious component, just so we can dive into that a little bit more. I There's definitely, like, when we were growing up, when I was in church, there was definitely this, like, God has a plan for your life. This is God's plan,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what He wants you to do, and even like even people saying stuff like, "Oh, well, God wanted me to do this for you. God wanted me to give this Bible to you," or I don't know, just stuff like that. I feel like it comes up
Mm-hmm.
so much in the way that people live their lives as a Christian, where they feel like, this is the person, like the one. This is the one, I'm supposed to marry, and like everyone has one person that they're destined to be with, and which that's a whole other topic, but that it
Yeah.
ties so much into this predeterminism of God having a plan of some sort.
Mm-hmm. I really had a hard time with the whole God has a plan thing because I have never known like what I wanted to do with my life, what kind of career. I always envied the people that knew when they were a kid they want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a nurse or whatever. And it was such a struggle for me because I was, always praying and seeking God and being like, what is the plan? Like, what am I supposed to do? What is my purpose? I felt so like I didn't have a purpose in life. And it was really hard for me. I mean, I know there was a good like 10-year period, basically between my in my 30s, late 20s, to late 30s, where like I was so focused on that and it really affected my mental health in a negative way. That is not the only thing. There's multiple other things, but it really contributed to,
Yeah.
having just not a bad view of myself, but just feeling like I didn't have a purpose in the world at all because I didn't know what it was supposed to be. And it was like, people kept telling me, well, ask God, pray. And I'm like, I don't hear anything, like it
Yeah.
was so frustrating
Yeah.
because
Like, when
I'm
am I
like,
supposed to learn?
everybody else seems to know what their plan
Uh-huh.
is and what they're supposed to do. And here I am, like,
Yeah.
just
That
riding
reminds
through
me of
life.
the. Have you ever seen Encanto? The Disney
No.
movie Encanto?
Mm-mm.
That's exactly what that movie is about. Is
Oh,
where the main character. You should watch it just because it reminds me of it. She's like, everyone has this like special power, I guess, and everyone learns what their special power is like pretty early on in their life. Like, I don't know, I'm gonna say 10 or something, and for some reason she didn't get a power, and so she grew up. And everyone around her, everyone knew kind of what their purpose was, what their destiny was, and she didn't know. And she's just like, "Why don't I have one? What's wrong with me?" And blah blah blah. And eventually, she gets it, but it's later, and it's like in a really special way, of course, for the movie. But yeah, that's exactly kind of what you're talking about. Just reminds me of that. That like, it's like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to find out like what
mm-hmm.
I'm supposed to do if I have this predestined plan? If God has a plan for me, how the fuck am I supposed to know what that is? Like, do
Yeah.
I just choose whatever and that's just what it is, or like, how do I decide? And then you're like, did I make the right choice? Is this the right way? Because there's no guidance
Yeah, it's so
on
stressful because I'm
anything.
like, well, I felt like I heard God say XYZ and then it didn't happen. And then I felt even worse because I'm like, well, I totally missed, this guidance or whatever. And I think it was maybe difficult for me because I took it like so literally. It was like, this is the rule book, this is what you need to do, this is how and other people probably had a more fluid like definition or they didn't really care as much, and me it was like, okay, this is what I have to do, and I just could not understand it and I couldn't make it happen, and I was just like, man,
Yeah.
I'm
I'm
doing what
sure
I
there's a
want
lot of
now.
people that are both. I think there's probably people that have had similar experiences as you. And I think
Hmm.
that there are other people who are more just like, whatever. I'll just do whatever, and they don't like, there's so many people I see in life, and particularly in Christianity, that just kind of just like don't care. They're just like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go
Hmm.
along and I'm just going to do this. And, it doesn't bother me that I'm just doing this and not doing my own thing. And, like
Well, yeah.
I just don't understand people like that.
I think that it also depends on the type of Christ, or at least I'm talking about within Christianity, the type of church that you go to and what denomination it is, because the ones that I went to, it was preached, and I don't even know if this is actually in the Bible, but that if you step outside the will of God, then that's when bad things happen. That's when your
Mm,
life goes to shit, and all these things happen because you're outside of what God is willing for your life. So that's why it was so important to me to find out, like, well, what is my purpose? What is God's plan? Because I didn't want, again, it goes back to the fear. I didn't want bad things to happen. And they were talking about, I mean, all kinds of things, finances, being in danger, like basically step out of that bubble of protection,
yeah,
and and I was afraid of that. I was like, man, I want my family to be safe and my kids to be safe, and I don't want to have financial difficulties, and all that kind of stuff. And so that
right.
was really what drove me specifically.
Yeah. How do you think that like creation plays into this whole theme of fate versus free will? Do you think creation and evolution play into this at all? Um, the reason I'm asking is because like there's this, just the idea of fate and free will. I feel like are at odds with each other because of what we're talking about, with God
Mm-hmm.
having a plan and everything. Similarly, I feel like there's a similar standoff between creation and evolution, where it's like God created the earth and everything, and evolution is totally the opposite, essentially, of
Mm-hmm.
that. Things were created over time and millions of years old. Do you feel like that's tied in at all, or do you feel like they're separate? I don't know, separate conversations, or what do you think about that? I'm interested.
Well, I've never thought about it before. I think that with creation, at least, that it's somewhat tied in, because it's like, the whole message of God knew you before you were born, when you were formed in your mother's womb, and it's like a womb, when it goes all the way back to like the beginning of creation, like,
Yeah,
God knew you were going to be here, and the hairs on your head, and all that stuff. So I think that the belief in creation also does tie into um, the predestination message.
yeah,
But
that's a
and
good
this is
point.
what's confusing is, and frustrating at the same time, is there's things in the Bible that they don't necessarily say, like, this is your fate or you're predestined for XYZ, but it talks about how things are planned out for you. It's contradictory, because then it says that you have a choice and that you
Yeah,
have free will, and and I'm like, okay, well, which one is it?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't really know the Bible very very much, especially I've forgotten so much now. So I feel like you probably are more familiar with scripture things than I am. But yeah, I do recall there being a lot of conversation about, definitely, God has a plan. I don't
Mm-hmm.
really remember reading that specifically, but I definitely remember hearing that. And I don't remember people talking about free will very often. That's for sure. But I'm sure that's probably in the Bible. But yeah, I agree. I think that creation would, now that you're mentioning like how it's framed in the Bible and how it's talked about, and how like God knows you before you're born and everything, that definitely makes sense. That it's more like tied into this concept. I don't know if like free will necessarily is tied into that as much. Like I wouldn't want to. I don't think that it's fate equals creation and free will equals evolution sort of
Right.
thing. But yeah, like what do you, now that you're outside of religion, what is your opinion, or what was your opinion even before, of evolution and like that whole argument?
I believed in creation, but I also believed in evolution. Not necessarily the Big Bang theory, but we evolve. Everything evolves over time, you know. Um now I don't know what I believe now, because I mean I look at the world the way that it is, and just like a baby, all of the things that go into when a baby's born, like how could that come from the Big Bang? Like I just can't wrap my mind around that. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just can't, you know. And I think it was easier to believe in creation because it was
Mm.
easier to believe that, you know, this God that I believed in created the earth in 6 days and here we are, you know, because it was like a divine creation or whatever. So I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, I'm kind of in the middle. I feel like, you know, because I, you know, I'm more spiritual. I know you're not, but I'm more spiritual than religious. And I do believe that there's like a higher power of some sort, because there's been things in my life that have happened that I can't explain. Um, maybe it was fate, you know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, but
I feel like I'm similar now. I feel like I'm, like there are things similar, like where just the way that things happened, the people I met and how the connections worked. Uh, I feel like I'm on a similar level with you in terms of like, I'm not really sure. I don't think it's God. I don't think it's Christianity, but I think that there might be something out there. Not, I don't know if controlling is the right way to say it, but I feel like there
guiding.
might be, yeah, some sort of higher power in the universe that's, you know, kind of, yeah, guiding and
Mhm.
overseeing things. But I don't know if it's like everything is, destined to like come out to this end result or something.
Mhm.
I'm not really sure because I mean I think it's easy to justify with that kind of explanation when you're talking about good things, but then when you talk about things that are, like people dying or getting hurt or
Mhm.
getting sick, or all the things that we don't like to deal with in life,
Or wars or
then
shootings or all of
yeah,
that
yeah,
stuff. It's like, oh, well, they have
exactly,
free will. They chose. And it's like, I
yeah,
mean, yes, that's true. They did make that choice, but you know, which
yeah.
one
But
is it?
if you're going to argue that everyone has a predestined plan, then that means that that was destined to happen,
Right.
and not for just them, but for the people that they were doing it to. So,
Hmm.
yeah, and so it's like when you talk about those things that are, harder to deal with, then it's like, well, now you're saying that this was supposed to happen to me. So, like, why? What did I do, or why am I having to deal with this or go through this
Yeah.
trauma? So I think it's hard to really tackle this topic. I feel like because it's there's so many different contexts that it falls into where you're like, well, I mean, I don't know, I don't know about that. It's kind of fucked up that I'm gonna have to go through this because that's God's plan,
Right.
and I don't know. I mean, but like you said, there's things that we've all gone through and
Hmm.
has led us to different places, different meeting different people, doing different careers,
Hmm.
and some of those things wouldn't have come to us if we hadn't gone through some of the bad times. So maybe in the moment it's that we don't understand it, but after the fact, it's kind of like, okay, like it's. I'm not saying that's good or I'm glad I went through that, but that like I had to go through that to get to where I am now.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like I'm on the fence about it all
Hmm.
the time, especially in the
Hmm.
past couple of years. I feel like I've been on the fence about it a lot. But before that, I was like, atheist. Like, no, like there's no God. I mean, I still don't believe that we go anywhere when we die. I don't feel like there's an afterlife at all. I feel like
Even
that,
after talking to a psychic?
Yeah,
Really? Okay.
yeah, I think so. Um, I think that, I mean, I think there's energy for
Hmm.
sure, but
When you say
yeah, I mean,
afterlife, are you specifically talking about heaven or hell? Or are you talking about like, because with energy and with like energetics and um psychic mediums and all of that, it's like, yeah, the body goes away, but the soul or the energy is still around because
mhm.
energy cannot be created or destroyed, right? So it has to go somewhere. So when you say you don't believe in an afterlife, do you mean you don't believe that even like the energy or the souls are still there, or there's specifically not a heaven and or a hell?
Like, I mean that I don't think that there is a place where people go when they die. Like, I don't think there's an actual destination where you go heaven, hell, purgatory, whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, when I die, I'm going to go see dad and I'm going to like reunite with him and we're going to have conversations and we're going to, shoot the shit about what happened over my lifetime or whatever. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. Um, Now, whether or not like our energy stays around, like I don't know what that means exactly. Like I don't know, can those energies interact with other energies? Can they have a conversation?
Mm-hmm.
Can they laugh? Can they talk? Can they do they have emotions? Like I don't know what that I don't know what that is, but
I mean,
I
I'm
definitely
shaking
don't
my
believe in
head and
heaven and
yes, like
hell.
I know. I mean, but it's just what I've read in books and what I've heard um, other people talk about, like psychic mediums, and I mean, I don't know about if you've ever felt like the presence of something or someone. Um, like you feel like someone is just like standing there looking at you. Have you ever felt like that? And
No,
there's nothing there. No.
I know I haven't.
Yeah. It's a really odd feeling. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I believe that I don't believe that they like go to a particular destination, but I don't think that once we're dead, there's nothing because the
Hmm.
energy has to go somewhere.
Yeah. Like, was that feeling a good feeling or a like a eerie feeling?
It actually has been both. It has to me. I describe it as the scared of the dark feeling. Like
Hmm.
I don't know how else to describe it. But there
Yeah.
have been other times it's been very warm and comforting, and I
Hmm.
don't think that it's like evil forces versus good. Like I don't believe that. It's just like an anxiety of like, I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I've never had that experience before. So, I mean, yeah, it's something to consider in terms of like the whole spiritual thing, it's I hadn't really considered that very much. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a good point. That's why we have these conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm not really sure if I have much more to say. I mean, I feel like we've sort of covered this topic, and I mean, I'm sure there's so many examples that we could go into and talk about, but um, yeah, to me, it just feels like this is, like I said at the beginning, this is a topic that we're constantly talking about in the world. There's so many opinions, there's so many examples, there's so much context that you can bring to this, and it's at the end it really doesn't get answered. It really comes down
Yeah.
to what do you believe, what do you feel is right? And I don't know if there is a right answer. And I mean, there must be a right answer, but we're not going to be able to answer it for sure. And
Yeah.
well, I guess we'll find out when we die, right?
Right.
And we'll know. And and just to that point, I feel like that's a big driving like component to how people convert. They're like, well, do you want to die and go to
Mm.
hell, or do you want to be saved and just have like a security blanket or whatever?
Yeah.
And
It's that if I die and I'm wrong, like a Christian would say, if I die and I'm wrong, I've lost nothing. But if you die and you're wrong, you've lost everything. And it's
yeah,
like,
exactly. I know. So whatever, but it's yeah, I just like the that arguing. the way that the Christians like to justify things, it just kind of drives me crazy. But yeah, I feel like this is kind of where we should end it. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I feel this one was a little bit more organic and kind of just went with it today. But thanks for sticking around, and yeah, we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us and peeling back the layers today. If you enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to support it, please share it with others, and please leave a review, like, subscribe, all that jazz. For more information about us, you can visit runionshavelayers.com, where you can find how to get connected with us and find resources mentioned in our episodes. Bye for now.